Of One America News.
I am confident because Basanas is very confident that they know more or less the position of the aircraft, so we should be able to locate it.
AirAsia's CEO gives an update on the recovery effort for the missing flight as more bodies are found and authorities zero in now on the plane's wreckage. Plus, thousands of demonstrators rally in central Moscow to protest the sentencing of a Russian opposition leader. And later, the flu is declared an epidemic after several children die of complications from the illness. We have the latest on the outbreaks, which have hit all across the country. Today is Tuesday, December 30th. And you're watching One America's Evening News. I'm Cassie Leuffen. Welcome. We are following breaking news tonight out of Canada, where authorities confirm 9 are dead in 3 separate but related domestic violence attacks in Alberta. The suspect, a suicidal man, allegedly shot a woman in her home Monday evening. Police were then called to another residence around midnight and found 7 bodies inside, including 2 children. Then, around 2 a.m., officials were alerted about a man who fatally shot himself inside a nearby restaurant, who they believe to be the suspect. A local police chief is calling this act a senseless mass murder, and we will continue to follow this story, bringing you more information as it becomes available to us. And now to this. The United Nations Security Council rejects a Palestinian resolution to end Israeli occupation within 3 years. The resolution, which also was a bid for Palestinian statehood, failed to get the minimum of 9 yes votes. It received 8 yes votes and 2 no votes from the United States and Australia. The United States has insisted on a negotiated peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, but not an imposed timetable. And our coverage continues tonight on the developing search for the missing AirAsia plane and the efforts to locate and recover bodies. According to the head of Indonesia's search operations, 3 bodies have been found from the flight, as debris from the jet has also been recovered in the Java Sea. Rescue workers were lowered from a helicopter to retrieve the bodies, at which point they reportedly saw what appeared to be more wreckage under the water. It is not clear as of now what caused the plane to crash, and while crews have discovered parts of the jet's interior, its black boxes have yet to be found. One America's Cameron Kramer has the latest on the recovery effort.
Debris from the AirAsia flight, which vanished on Sunday, has been found in the Java Sea. The Indonesian transport minister confirmed the objects were indeed from the plane. The items, including some which resembled an emergency slide and plane door, were spotted around 10 miles from where the jet was last seen on radar, about 100 miles off the coast of Indonesia. 162 people were on board the jet when it disappeared Sunday morning, 40 minutes after takeoff from Indonesia heading to Singapore. Meteorologists say the airspace was full of dense storm clouds, and the area around the flight path is in monsoon season at the moment. Several countries rushed to Indonesia to help with search and recovery efforts, including the U.S., which said it was sending the USS Samson destroyer, joining at least 30 ships, 15 aircraft, and 7 helicopters in the search for the plane.
And as search and rescue teams pull bodies from the Java Sea, investigators attempt to piece together how the plane went down. On Sunday, the plane took off from Surabaya, Indonesia, bound for Singapore. And officials say shortly after takeoff, one of the pilots asked air traffic control for permission to climb to a higher altitude in order to avoid bad weather. However, that request was denied due to the presence of another plane in the same airspace. Just minutes after that, the plane disappeared from radar. And staying on this, the CEO of AirAsia is expressing his confidence that authorities are closer to finding the wreckage of the plane, but he's also emphasizing that the recovery effort is currently focused on retrieving the bodies. Tony Fernandez says that relatives of the crash victims are being flown out to Surabaya to begin identifying the bodies. He adds that he plans to visit the recovery site on Wednesday.
Let's focus on getting the evacuation out. If we have a lot of families over there, it's going to complicate for the Basanas guys to finish off the evacuation. So the key now is to get everyone back to Surabaya.
Meanwhile, experts say that once the plane is found, the salvage effort should proceed quickly from there, since this wreckage is likely in shallow water. Officials say the debris was found in an area of water just between 80 to 100 feet deep. The U.S. Navy, meanwhile, is ready to help in efforts to find this missing AirAsia jet and recover its passengers. A Pentagon spokesman says it can deploy the USS Sampson as well as the USS Fort Worth to help in these search efforts. The crafts are already being modified to better assist Indonesian authorities.
She's being outfitted with side scan sonar in case that would be needed. As you know, that is a fairly sophisticated piece of technology that allows us to map the ocean floor, at least to be able to help find wreckage and debris on the ocean floor.
The USS Fort Worth is currently in Singapore and could reach the search area in a day or two. The Navy is also preparing dive teams if need be. And an Italian prosecutor says migrants were among the passengers on a burning ferry as authorities work now to determine the exact number of people who were aboard the ship. After rescuing hundreds of people from the ferry on Monday, authorities ran into some confusion. There was a discrepancy between the number of survivors and the number of passengers on the ship's manifest. Gavino Garay has more on the latest revelations, which may provide some clarity, but also lead to a higher death toll.
Italian prosecutor Giuseppe Volpe says illegal migrants were among the hundreds of people trapped on a burning Italian ferry off the Greek coast.
It has been confirmed that there were illegal migrants on the ferry, probably in the hold. Our fear is that once the wreck has been recovered, we will find those who have died.
The number of those on board has been murky, with dozens of passengers unaccounted for. It's unclear if they drowned or had even been on board in the first place. Italian officials say at least 11 people died in the fire. 2 Albanian crew members on a tugboat also died when their cable attached to the burning wreck snapped and hit them during salvage operations.
As authorities try to determine whether any passengers from the Norman Atlantic ferry are missing, the ones who are already accounted for are telling their stories. Gavino Garay has more on these rescued passengers.
A terrifying experience off the coast of Greece, where passengers aboard an Italian car ferry that caught fire didn't know if they'd make it out alive. Survivors brought to Brindisi, Italy, recount their ordeal.
We heard people screaming and running out of their cabins, so we left ours as well. Then we saw the smoke coming out from the ship. We grabbed the life vests under the beds and went out to the deck, dressed in whatever we were wearing at that moment. Outside, we couldn't see anything because it was dark.
Surrounded by frigid waters as their ship burned, one passenger from Germany could only hope help would reach them in time.
I was lucky. I was saved after nearly 24 hours. And this is a long time to fill with hope and with fear that you will die, and it changes always.
Of the more than 400 people on board, officials say at least 10 died.
A distress call from a cargo ship prompts Greece to investigate before letting the ship continue on its way, on its path. The Blue Sky M ship is now heading for Italy after a passenger reportedly complained the passengers on board were without water, without food, and without blankets. Unconfirmed reports also referred to armed men being on board. However, the ship's captain later said that no assistance was being sought. And according to a tracking website, the ship abruptly changed direction several times this morning. Moving now to the Middle East, the U.S. and NATO have only recently ended their 13-year-long combat mission, as you know, in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is already claiming victory against the U.S. About 1,300 troops, most of whom are American, will remain in the country as part of a support mission. Violence, meanwhile, has flared up yet again as the Taliban vows to crush Afghan forces who are trained by the U.S. Nearly 3,200 Afghan civilians were reportedly killed in clashes between the Taliban and the army, and that is this year alone. Over 4,600 Afghan army and police have also died in Taliban attacks. On to reports of the Islamic State releasing an interview with the Jordanian fighter pilot who the militant group captured last week. This is a non-verified interview published in the terror group's English language magazine, and it quotes the 26-year-old as saying that his jet was taken down by a missile. Now, that quote contradicts the U.S. position on this. The United States has officially denied that the pilot's plane was shot down. The interview ends with ISIS asking the captured pilot what he thinks this group will do to him, to which he responds simply, quote, "They will kill me." And the U.S. launches an airstrike against al-Shabaab militants in southern Somalia, targeting a senior leader of the group. Officials are unsure if the strike hit the leader, whose name is unknown at this time. There were no operations on the ground, and officials believe there were no civilian casualties. Continuing on to Cameroon. Cameroon is launching airstrikes against Boko Haram in an effort to force out 1,000 fighters who have seized a military base. Cameroon's government says Nigerian-based Islamic extremists attacked 5 villages just days before overrunning a military base on Sunday. The government confirms President Paul Biya ordered the strikes, including 2 bombing raids and a heavy firefight in response to the assailants. Cameroon has not released a death toll as a result of that operation. Meantime, Russian police dispersed thousands of protesters near Red Square in one of the boldest demonstrations in Russia in recent years. Some of the protesters were seen being detained and put into police buses. The demonstrators were protesting the conviction of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Here is Gavina Garay with more on the arrest of one of President Vladimir Putin's most vocal critics.
Russian dissident Alexei Navalny posts a Twitter photo of him breaking house arrest, vowing to join protesters in a government opposition rally. He was soon detained by police. It came shortly after a Russian court sentenced him for embezzling money. He addressed his supporters outside the courthouse.
This power does not deserve to exist. It should be destroyed. I'm calling today on everybody to take to the streets. I'm calling to take to the streets until the power, which tortures innocent people, is removed.
In Moscow, opposition protesters braved freezing temperatures with thousands registered online to join the protest. Navalny led protests against Russian President Vladimir Putin 3 years ago, when tens of thousands took to the streets to fight corruption.
All right, and straight ahead on One America News.
I made some very big mistakes. Mistakes that I immensely regret.
New York Representative Michael Grimm announces he's stepping down from Congress after pleading guilty to tax evasion charges. We'll share Speaker of the House John Boehner's response to that up next.